I really need to get some new intro screens. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Happy Catty Crypto here. And we've got a nice podcast episode and really looking to the future, where we're heading and what's going on. I've got Tobias, which is Zaradar. But I think Tobias is more fitting currently right now. But thank you so much for getting the time to actually come on and have another chit chat with us about everything that's kind of transpired, Tobias. It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes things don't pan out quite as they are expected, and sometimes that's normal, isn't it?
Hey, buddy. Well, yeah. Thanks of all for the welcome and so on. I've just a reference to my moniker. Zaradar has been my alias since I was 15, so I actually respond almost as well to that as my real name. With that said, life is chaotic. Life is change. I have, as I've said before, practiced Kung Fu for close to a decade. And one of the things I like about this sport or this thing is that it also works with you at, the mental level. And one of the things that they teach you very early on through practice and talking and so on is that, you can't control the energies of the world around you all the time. In certain situations you can push, and in other situations you'll just have to sort of go with the flow. And I've been gradually witnessing a deterioration of the intellectual capacity of Terra rebels over the last months, with developers slowly leaving, starting with Resolvents and then Maventus and then Max and so on and so forth. And basically just starving us of the type of intellectual capacity that we need to, as I see it, build some of these more complex, ambitious ideas that we as a community are discussing. And that obviously has led us toward a situation where we needed to come to some sort of conclusion on what to do with ourselves and the future. And over the course of various number of sessions and talks with different parties and so on within the org, we came to this agreement that we needed to, slim down the organization and focus on what was important. And I guess the problem and which was created this situation was that inherently there was a difference of opinion on what was important. And that then ultimately led me to the conclusion that, that was probably not really gonna work long term, regardless of how much I wanted it to at the personal level, because inherently I would have been left alone in the org, trying to do or manage all of the layer 1 stuff with all the other parties while also managing all my other responsibilities. And that was an unbalanced structure that would always, favor the wrong type of business because of the decision that we made as a whole. And while I respect that decision, there wasn't really any time given to debate this as a whole, even though I actually encouraged that we should do that, next month on our next town hall and just sort of prepare the work forward up until then. And that meant that we sort of ended up in a situation where a few eggs got broken, and as usual, when people do something that hurt other people inside the org, the people who feel hurt in this case, they usually arrive at my desk, and then I have to deal with that. And that, was just, I don't think, sort of okay. So we had a discussion about this whole active-inactive set in terms of who made what on where on the list and so on. And then shortly after, the distribution proposal was passed, where I think it was misattributed in terms of who got what. I think it was done too quickly. There should have been an internal discussion about whether or not to liquidate the money at a point in time where it had already depreciated 20% in value from the original deal, meaning that the $150,000 was actually only $120,000 by the time we got the money, right? So inherently in the deal that was made, we also lost some value there. So overall, maybe we would have been better off just sitting on it for a while and asking people to wait a few months until we could sell it, at break even or maybe at a small profit, which would have given the org more money. But instead, people decided to, pocket that and assume risk that is not really healthy from any perspective. So yeah, all in all, that just led me to conclude that, given also other incidents in the past around these internal funding discussions, there was just really no more future in trying to build up a layer 1 capacity within Terra Rebels.
And there's always been, more or less guidance problems or directional problems inside Terra Rebels. I found not so much with like the L1 development situation, because what I've always found with the L1 development side is you guys deal with so much drama and BS that's not even generated by yourselves, but yet you have to deal with it on top of still having to do, all of the coding that you guys are doing, taking people's work and, sewing it all together to make it what it needs to be. So,
well, I think what a lot of people need to understand in all of this is that the current state of layer 1 work is like trying to diffuse, I don't know, the fallout of a nuclear meltdown, right? The chain melted down and we gradually are picking at the pieces to try to figure out how much we can change things without breaking things, right? That means that the amount of coding we do at the layer 1 currently it's not really very significant, because most of the work we do is trying to analyze the existing code and test different assumptions in order to ascertain how we can best contain and manage the situation to move us to a point where we can get the upgrade done and so on and so forth, right? And right now we are stuck in the Genesis streaming problem where we kind of fell into a pit because the network that we are now trying to fix have been using a Genesis migration approach for the last few iterations, like I think Columbus 5, 4, and 3. And that means that that we're kind of stuck in a situation where we're having a hard time making the upgrade handlers that Notational wrote work. And we can't use the Genesis with all of the WASM code because the Cosmos SDK itself can't handle that, because it wasn't built to stream the Genesis, which is something that multiple parties have been discussing for a while, but which hasn't been done yet, right? So the point I'm just trying to get to here without getting too much off track is that layer 1 development is about analyzing and implementing based on trying to just take one more step towards changing the system to a new state that will support the features that people want.
it's probably a good way to break it down for people that struggle to understand things. That was a pretty simple explanation.
And the point I'm trying to make in this is that all of the drama basically disrupts our peace of mind. That makes it harder for us to maintain our focus on analyzing the complex problems, because we're constantly pulled away from this, insanely complex Rubik's cube that we're trying to figure out. And then we have to go and deal with stuff that inherently is very human. And for many developers who spend the most of their time in front of computers, feels a little alien sometimes, right? That's why we're not always super social, because we really just want to play with our tech stuff. And then once in a while, we're very social, depending on our requirement, right? So in general, devs, they just want to code and be left alone, I think is a very good way of looking at it. And when they then, actually take the time to step out and say something, maybe with me being the exception because I say something all the time, you should try to listen to them. and understand what it is they're saying, because that's actually a very rare occurrence where they're either asking for feedback or maybe even for help because they're stuck in something where they need the inspiration or resources or more devs or whatnot to help them fix a problem.
And I can honestly attest to people listening in the audience this morning that, you know, our lead developer in the HCC factory is left to his own devices. We've actually kind of nicknamed him Dr. Kipper because he has the ability to take any kind of idea that we chuck at him and make it a reality because of the simple fact he's able to just code and do what he does best and leave the front end kind of talking, the face of things to people, to the people that are really kind of good at dealing with that. But it just seems like that Terra Rebels started off as this really amazing thing. And then slowly, like you said, we saw people like Marventus, and Marventus done some amazing work, didn't he, during his time at Terra Rebels, if I'm not mistaken there, right, Zaradar?
Yeah, I mean, Marventus was the cornerstone of our front-end team for a very long time, up until he got to the point where he simply concluded that it was unhealthy to, keep working the way he was doing. And he opted to simply just leave and focus on his family, which is something that I think everybody can respect. And then I can personally understand, right? I just didn't have that same requirement that he did at the time. But I mean, obviously, you get to a point where you have to start thinking about whether or not it even makes sense anymore, right? And for me, I think the only reason why I'm still in this particular fight is because I'm fighting for people that I care about. And as I've stated publicly in the past, I care about three things largely: my home, my family, and my children, or my child in this one case. And I mean, my home wasn't working out for me anymore, so I just left because that's what you do when you can't live in the same building as everybody else. And I mean, I think I'm a single parent. I have lots of friends, I just don't get to see them that often. But I tend to interface with this community almost daily. So in many ways, relations like yourself and DJ Trev and Ed and BG and Mustafa and all sorts of people have, become very important to me in my day-to-day life, just as a way to feel engaged with the world around me while I, sit in front of my computer and work on whatever stuff I have to work to in order to, pay my bills and buy my son the shoes he wants and so on. So I think that is the state of affairs, and yeah, that's just how life is, right?
Definitely. When I first got involved with Lunar Classic, the same as you, it was this movement, and as time's gone on, it's become this emotional thing for myself. And then meeting people like you, where we've been through some things, and a lot of things are happening, and being where we are now, I've always managed to bounce off of you, and you always bring me back when things are kind of getting a little bit tough with everything that goes on. And it really does matter the people that you met during what's happened, because right now it's what is keeping us all here is the fact that we've got this real emotional attachment to each other, and we find solace in one another even during times of what's going on now with complete panic disorder and distrust and everything like that. So Tobias, I think it's safe to say the funds really didn't go to where they needed to go, and it's sad because everything should have gone a lot more differently. I think there was too much focus on silly things like like the marketing team just kind of never really marketed with any of the projects that are actually involved in Lunar Classic. And from a marketing team, you expect that, and you always did your job on a coding side. As a developer, you've always performed your role, and it just looks to the community right now that the money just went to people that have done stuff, but not really what was needed. And the people that did need paying have not really been looked after. So
Well, I mean, I think, again, as I've stated before, it's very hard to stipulate that the money didn't go to somebody who didn't deserve it, right? Because inherently everybody deserved to get paid. This was again more a matter of saying the money needed to go somewhere that would incentivize us to grow our business centers, right? And also looking at the people who did get paid quite significantly. There's a couple of names on that list in the mod group that I personally don't even know. I mean, I know who they are, but I don't really know what they do. And I know there was a group of 4 or 5 people who were largely left out, like Sabine Krishna, who Mustafa ended out paying out of his own pocket. And I think Venus, I think Jay I don't know if Jay got a bit on the bonus side and so on. But the inactive set, especially the developers in the active set, they should have gotten a bit more, right? And I think that was one of the reasons why I actually didn't really feel that entitled to any of the Rebel Station funding personally, because I was trying to work on securing another avenue of funding for the Layer 1 team. And I was perfectly fine with the time I had spent on sort of, advising around and helping coordinate and so on, to simply just do that for the org and foregoing my cut in order to give some of these other guys maybe a bit more, right? But instead what happened was that the organization as a whole made a democratic decision to source the money to people whom largely would not have been able to claim that money in the first place if it hadn't been for a lot of the people in the inactive set. And that, I think, was a great injustice.
It's not good when you don't look after, everybody that's important in it's proof in the pudding as to how it's all played out and where we're sitting now in the conversation we're having. So,
I mean, the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that, they could have done the vote, and then they could have, or they could have posted the proposal and had a talk about it, right? Because we've actually, over the last month, I've been very verbal about the fact that we needed to slow down our internal governance system. It was basically running too fast, and people were having a hard time keeping up. I know people who voted for the distribution proposal who did. The problem is that the time between the last distribution proposal was posted and the money was distributed was simply too short. And I mean, once the money is distributed, then it's kind of done, right? Then inherently you'll have a very hard time clawing that money back if the org, decides on something else. And I know from talking with some people that they already gave back the money they got because they didn't like the way it was handled either. And then I know some people who need the money and they can't give it back because they really need the money, right? And we could have had that discussion internally as an org and best to how to manage that funding. We didn't. They claimed it for themselves, and I think they left some people out in the cold. And now it seems like they're even trying to go as far as to start spinning a narrative that I somehow wanted all the money for myself, which then I guess I wouldn't have needed to work with them in the first place. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But yeah, I guess, people will say whatever they want to.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense that you would do something like that for the simple fact that
I could have done it. I could have done it long ago. I mean, why would I
why
go
would you wait
so far and wait so long to
exactly
do that if that is what I wanted to do?
it
That's
would be
just
so
not
much
logical.
work.
It's like
The
what's called.
stress the
It's like
stress.
I feel like this constant parent that's constantly fighting with this network of teenagers, and they're just refusing to accept what I'm telling them, and then they start projecting their own shit onto me, like, you're greedy, or why should you get paid this much, when it's like, dude, you really don't get it. I don't need this job. I can help you people, but that has certain requirements. those are non-negotiable. If you don't want my help, as I've said many times before, I'm perfectly fine not doing anything, right? I have a lot of other things that I can also do.
So what I've been thinking recently, right, is more or less, if I'm correct in saying this, it's around 25,000 a month for someone in your situation to more or less have you full time, right?
It's a fairly simple calculation, and I've done it before, right? So I'll just do it again really quickly. The average hourly rate for a consultant of my skills in Denmark is roughly between 1,000 and 1,500 Danish kroner, right? We can average that out to roughly $160, give or take, depending on the exchange rate. And if you work 160 hours a month, that becomes $25,600. It's as simple as that. That is the generic standard consultancy thing that I can do in a number of places, right? And then there's the employment thing where I make 12.5K. That is, including some benefits and stuff, obviously. We have a number of social benefits that are mandated in a country like Denmark, meaning that an employer has to pay, I think it's roughly 6.25% of my yearly wage as vacation money. So what it really amounts to is like a full month, 5 weeks paid vacation every year, right? Then they have another mandate to provide a pension, where they typically have to match the amount that you're willing to pay from your pension up until like 5% of your total salary, right? Which means that if you invest 5% of your salary into your pension, then the company adds in another 5% on that. And then there's all the other incentives like free internet and free phone and a free computer and all that shit, right? So all of that totaled up amounts to roughly $12,500 a month, which is what I make if I get a job. And in that job, I'm also allowed to have sick days, and I get education. I have a team of people. I don't have 100,000 plus people on Twitter all arguing about what they think I should do with my time and so on, right? So I just have a very nice, cozy setup, right? So that is the deal I get like that. So if I was to accept a 12.5K deal right now for this network, I would be discounting my time by roughly 50% because I'm not getting, an employment deal. I'm not anybody's employee. I'm somebody working for a group of investors who cannot provide me with job security and pension benefits and all of that shit. So I'm simply just a paid advisor / consultant, right? And right now, Ed and I are once again being, as fair as we can, while once again discounting our lives. So we have been working on a proposal wherein we will try to secure, runway to pay me $12,500 as a consultant for 6 months. And then he will take half that pay himself personally, and then we'll bring in Frag from TCV as well, right? So it's important that people understand that once again, even though it's a lot of money for many people, once again, we are deciding to try to invest our time into helping this community by discounting our own potential earnings, right? And that is a significant sacrifice that people actually should maybe just stop a minute to think about, rather than to say, well, it's a lot of money to make 12,500 a month. Yes, it is, but I spent 25 of my years doing this shit, right? There's a reason why people want to hire me. And that's back to supply and demand. So as I said on the CK show, if investors don't grow up to this fact, if they are all demands and no support, then they will chase away their talent like they've done consistently so far, and they will be left behind with the people who can most likely tell them a nice story, but who can probably not make that story a reality.
Yeah, it becomes a war of attrition at that point. I've explained this a few times recently about, you know, the idiots being able to survive the storm because of the simple fact that they just don't understand, or they don't really care on that scale, or the people that are strictly here for money to make profit and they're going to prosper at the end. It's all just who can survive the longest in this, and it shouldn't be like that. So it's one of the biggest flaws I've always seen with Terra Rebels was there was too many people pulling in too many directions, and that went to be the same for nodes. We never, like, Terra Rebels launched a node themselves, but then you saw different factions. Vegas would launch his own node, then Terra C Vita would be launched, and you would have thought all of that would be crunched down into one node, one house, one banner, and then possibly sending those coins you get from your rewards to stake, to then, build up an inner treasury that pays out stake and rewards.
I understand what you're saying, and to be honest, I've had this talk many times over the last 3-4 months with people, and I've said every time that I understand that you have a volunteer organization, people want to help for various reasons. I'm not going to get into those, but people want to help, people want to do something, right? Now, from one side of that equation, it can be very aggravating if you want to help, but people are telling you to not do anything, right? But on the other side, if you try to help while the people who are trying to do the important stuff are busy and you then fuck up, then you distract from their time, right? And what we found ever since even the beginning of Terra Rebels was that every time anything like the business intelligence thing or whatever random thing people wanted to try to create that didn't really focus on the software stuff was sort of put into action, it largely just failed and created a lot of noise, maybe with a few exceptions, right? And that means that in general, you're right that there was always a problem of focusing. And while I, and this was not only me, I think Radar also worked hard to try to get that to happen, and a few other people. But by and large, it was just almost impossible to get people to stop, coming up with new stuff and spending time on new stuff. And I think inherently, it was probably a consequence of working on Discord, which I was also very against for a long time. I mean, it was fun in the beginning, don't get me wrong. It was great to meet all of these new people, and I love, to help the ones that I can. But at the end, it just became too much, right? It was almost impossible to focus in work channels, and
You sit
because you were
procrastinating
constantly
too much.
summoned. Well, we're back to the peace of mind thing, right? I mean, I would, in my new job that I started, have people who would, I had to just learn to turn off Discord in the day hours because I would get disrupted all the time. And this was on my regular job, right? Where I was working for pay, and it isn't really very professional to have to sit around and deal with a Discord message or something like that. That's not related to your primary job, right? So I learned quickly to turn off Discord then, but the bottom line is that Discord is not inducive of a healthy working environment. That is something that I think a lot of the blockchain sort of projects and teams that I've followed over the years have all sort of gotten around to concluding, and then they've taken steps to address that, either by moving to Slack or some other similar
Trello, something like that, where you can actually set tasks people take to so I always knew this because I watch GOT Hub a lot, or GitHub, whatever you want to call it, and it's the backlog of like things that need doing, but no one actually wants to solve current problems.
And I mean, we actually had a guy who worked a bit on trying to structure all of this, called Loki, who was actually a really cool dude from India. But Loki, he worked for IBM, right? He was a technical and project manager for IBM, and he was pretty straight. He was pretty honest up front with me on his job interview. He said, "Listen, I've come into this ecosystem. I have this capacity. I would love to work, but I'm also looking to, make some money off of this, right?" I think that's a fair thing to say. And I was like, "Cool, dude. I can't promise you anything for the foreseeable future because of this, but so and so." And I think at some point after 3 to 4 months, he also just disappeared into nothing. And we're talking about a guy who was moved from India to the US by IBM to manage 2 development teams and an entire product fucking pipeline. And we as a community and Terra Rebels as an organization, I guess inherently failed in creating the incentives to keep him working more on that towards a point where that would have been a success, right? And that is the problem you have when you're trying to build something like what we are trying to build out of nothing, which then goes back to why it's so important that we manage the money we have very carefully. And we are a lot more diligent about who we hand that money to, other than let's just look around the room and see who we feel has been most active the last whatever, and then pay them, right? Because the fact of the matter is that the point we were at now is a process that we've been building towards for 6 months, right? So while I understand the need to create an active and an inactive set, I think the money that came in from the 1103 whatever prop was, if you're only buying a website, it was too expensive, right? I couldn't sell a website for that kind of money. Maybe back when I started back in 1998, but that was a whole different time and a different story.
Me and Strafe spoke about the pricing.
So the point is that I think largely that money was a subset of a budget exercise that we failed to bring to completion due to other things getting in the way. And that was not really anybody's fault, but I think the money was viewed by the community as more than maybe just, a few things. And I had a discussion with Ed around that because, quite frankly, I felt that there was no acceptance criteria specified from the side of the community, right? And I think that is the problem with using the governance layer as a way to secure funding, because what really happens is that anybody comes and say, "I have an idea, here's the outline of the idea," but there's nobody on the opposite side that can really enforce any acceptance criteria in terms of time or quality or whatever, right? Because there's no actual procurement negotiation taking place, because the community as a whole is not organized enough to do that, right? Which means that what happens is people say, "Give me money, I stipulate this," right? And this can be anything from, "I'm just going to say hi to the whole world every day," to, "I'm going to actually do something really cool." And then people invest in that, right? But maybe there needs to be like a process of screening and negotiation before that. And I think maybe that is what we need to work towards. And then we can use this particular thing as an example, because again, I think the perceived value of what the investors thought they were investing in versus the actual value that was provided looking at the distribution, I think that was just off. And again, I thought about it and I was like, I can't defend that. What am I going to do? Well, I think it's best to just pack my bags and leave.
And that's always a sad thing that I never ever want to hear come out of, especially your mouth. But so this whole, you saying about this person who worked and they came from India to the USA, they from IBM moved them, and this whole idea of incentivizing. So I had suggested about pretty much developing a developers pool specifically to have funds in there to attract developers externally. So someone like this person could then look at that pool and go, I could do some work, put it forward. If the community like it and they want to go ahead with it, cool, I'll get my funding from the developers pool. And this idea of starting to really branch out. So Ed's recently spoken about, reworking the gas fees, and it's quite simple maths. Our gas fees are around 60 times lower on average than what is
Yeah,
normally the.
we can charge if you wanna. We can charge I think it's up to 60 times more or some stupid shit like that. I read somewhere. To if we want to and still be competitive, right? I don't know what the number is because I haven't talked with Ed about that in particular. I read some other guy who was writing something about that somewhere. But the problem is that we have what like it's not that many transactions per block. Is it like 2 point something on average?
Yeah, so it's currently, I think Ed said, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think Ed said it was currently like 2.5.
Yeah. So we have 2.5 transactions per block. And what happens to these 2.5 transactions per block if the fee becomes 60 times more or 10 times more or whatever, right? I mean, we don't really know what the incentive is for these transactions other than people are just probably sending money between sexes and dexes and their own accounts and whatnot. But I'm assuming that whoever is doing it is taking the gas fee into account in some sort of equation that leaves them with a profitable outcome. So what we just have to be wary about when we do this, because I've actually fully, support its ideas around this, and I think it's something we should look at, is that what the unintended economic consequences are for the current actors, meaning the people doing the transactions, when we change that particular metric, because that has a quite I mean, just look at the shuttle bus thingy, right? When it closed down due to the ETH gas price being too high. I mean, there are economic incentives in some of these layer 2 applications that goes out of whack when we just tweak small things just a little bit.
Yeah. So, for example, folks, if you're wondering what could possibly get thrown out of, play or it could mess around with stuff, we have multiple different aspects of the HCC factory, and one of those is our auto compounding module we developed in-house. We would then have to look at our system and ensure that those changes are okay, and if we need to adapt to it. So it would always be something, wouldn't it, Tobias, that it needs good discussion across the board, and there needs to be a good amount of data built up to support us pushing those fees upwards.
I think at least we would need to try to reach out to. I mean, we would probably need to do some analysis, yes. So we would need to collect some data to try to figure out if there were any pattern around who are sending these transactions, right? Because everybody's pseudonymous, but we can always do like statistical analysis over time to see who's actually sending and who's actually receiving. And from that, we can establish patterns, and then maybe we can reach out to them. Maybe we can just do it on Twitter, and the people will get back to us, right? But we need to somehow get a hold of the people generating these transactions and start a dialogue around saying, what would the consequences be for you if we do this? And they might say, hey, it's nothing. We don't care because the users are the one paying the fee, and they're just paying it in fiat. So, they'll just end up paying $1 instead of 1 cent or whatever, right? And then if the business model that they're operating can handle that, then everything, I guess, is kosher, and it just becomes the cost of doing business, which is inherently kind of what I'm also, alluding at when I talk about the petition pool things and building our way out of trouble and so on, is that we need to find ways to offload these taxes on the businesses in a way that eventually just makes it part of the price the consumer pays when they use a given service. But because there is no real organization happening between these different teams and groups and so on around this subject, it's very hard to gauge, right? Because anybody can deploy a smart contract on chain, and once it starts running, then it's subject to any changes we do on the layer 1. And that is always, a thing we have to deal with, which also just slows down development in general, because you sort of end up in this situation where you have to do a lot of testing to make sure that things don't break.
A lot of testing goes into just the things that we do at HCC. So currently, Lunar Classic, you may or may not know this, is is doing really well in the GameFi sector. And I believe that these three projects, being Metagloria, Exodus, and Lunar Burning Nights, are going to help, in pushing that transactions per block upwards. Even if it's a small amount, it's still an increase. And, Miata launching a marketplace also that's more microtransactions across the board. And we just need as much as we can get.
No, I totally agree with you on that, but this is also back to what we just talked about with changing the gas fees, right? Microtransactions work because they're cheap, right? Otherwise, making them is back to the story of how you spend 1 Bitcoin buying a cup of coffee, right? Which is like an old story from back in like 2015 or whatever, where somebody came up with an example of how you could actually do a Bitcoin transaction that would cost you the entire Bitcoin, right? And that's like, when you're dealing with these micro payments, you want to have very cheap gas prices, and we have to remember that if we're dealing in the microtransaction realm, then we're competing with networks like IOTA, who offer free transactions, right? As long as you just validate one other transaction. So price still has to be something we need to look at very carefully, depending on what kind of network we want to be.
So I think a good kind of, I tell you what would definitely get affected is all of the current stable coins we have. I mean, a lot of them cost you more to swap them than what you get anyway. So I think those would be affected. But for people, kind of just thinking to themselves, Tobias, where are we heading right now? Is it safe to say that, a new L1 team is going to be put together? You're going to propose this payment, and then hopefully we're going to start seeing actual forward movement and seeing you guys do what you do best, because you really have done so much work to get us to where we are. I know there's been a lot of people involved, and I don't know all of their names, so I'm not just going to name a couple of them. But there has been many involved. Are you going to be looking to possibly, get some of the old people back that left Terra Rebels along the route? Because so many good people left Terra Rebels. I mean, I left Terra Rebels for the simple fact that I was part of marketing and ops, and it was just more, we're going to create a lottery. We want hoodies, we want jumpers, we want merch. And I just didn't want to be part of that. I wanted to build. And I think it's very important that the community right now kind of stops this panicking.
So to sort of answer that question, because there's not an easy, clear answer to that, right? And we are working on a proposal. That proposal will get submitted once we're done negotiating with the different parties that needs to get funded by the proposal. And then once we are done with that proposal will be, submitted. But I mean, we can't guarantee that it passes. It could be vetoed. It could be not passed. I mean, it might pass. But the bottom line is that there's no guarantees. For me, it's the functional equivalent of sending a job application. That doesn't mean that I automatically think I'm going to get the job. It means that I sent an application, and then I'm going to send another application to another job, and then I'm going to look at what jobs, what employers come back to me and say, hey, we would like to talk to you about future employment, right? And that's where we are with that. So I would say that if the prop is submitted and the prop is passed, then there is 100% guarantee that we will work towards creating a layer 1 team under the aegis of the CGF, most likely, which would consist of the people we talked about, right? There might be a world wherein, depending on what some of my other current offers that I'm entertaining pans out to be, I would have a dual role, and then I would source part of my monthly funding to some of the junior devs that I'm bringing in as well, who have agreed to just come in and work for free, but whom I actually believe actually have the capacity to become very talented layer 1 developers if we invest in them as a community, right? And in particular, I'm talking about Zoro, and I'm talking about RagePie. So we're going to bring these two guys in as well. They're not going to be mentioned in the proposal. I actually think we are mentioning them in the proposal as junior developers. They will basically just work primarily with Frag and myself and Ed in whatever capacity we need them to. And they will not be obligated to meet any real, demands other than, meeting or showing up for meetings and delivering on the things we agree upon. But that's the current structure we're looking at, and that will retain the layer 1 talent that we have currently. Now, the last part of your question is probably the most tricky one, which is regarding the people who left us, like who left the community entirely. Now, by and large, all of these people left because they didn't feel incentivized to stay here rather than choose other options for themselves, right? So regardless of how we look at that, we will be like the, ex-boyfriend trying to convince our ex-girlfriend to come back to us, and we were really kind of like an asshole last time. And oh, by the way, we didn't really give them anything for their efforts other than a lot of, stress and drama. So I'm not too sure on that, to be honest. Maybe if we offer them a really good deal, but would we then even be able to afford that? I've also said in the past that one of my concerns around paying salaries to people like myself is that I don't think we can really afford it, right? And again, if if the proposal Ed and I are working on, if that passes and I agree to work for 6 months for these 12.5K, that only really works because I'm once again discounting myself, right? Compared to what I could comparatively make somewhere else. And that again does not really provide any long-term guarantees for the network in terms of my incentives to stay here, because I might just decide to quit after a month if it's too much of a headache, right? Let's say I say yes, and then all of a sudden every day I have 15 teenagers on Twitter who wants to remind me that they're part of paying me to try to solve some insanely complex problem, and why haven't I solved that problem yet? That might not be something that I really find to be, inducive of what I call a healthy working environment, and that might also, cause me to revise my decision down the road. So again, we don't unfortunately offer a very mature workspace. We can't afford to offer, the 250,000 a month we need for the top tier blockchain talent. So we're going to have to try to, make do with what we have right now. And what we have right now is guys like Ed and Frag and myself, who are all highly talented and skilled at all sorts of things. But when it comes from, a layer 1 perspective, we're all just still learning, right? I mean, I've worked with Cosmos SDK since May. I think a large part of my understanding of these systems are largely derived from past work I did in other things, or just comparing it to the work I did on Ethereum, right? But Ethereum and Cosmos SDK is not a one-to-one comparison. There are subtle differences that make them different. So again, that is the situation that we're in, and I think we will submit the proposal. If it passes and we succeed in setting some clear milestones and acceptance criteria for delivery, and Ed and I have been working on these as part of the proposal as well, then I think we will give it a shot, and we will do our best to make things work. And I think our best is pretty good, so I think that's worth the investment. And then we'll have to evaluate, right, right now we're running on a quarterly basis, so I've agreed to only accept 3 months of secured run rate rather than 6, which is again me taking on more risk just to try to see if we can make this viable. But the bottom line is that we have 3 months to sort of prove ourselves, and if we don't do anything meaningful in that time, I would not advise the community to invest further, because then that would just be, like some dude said earlier on Twitter, paying for me to sit around and scratch my balls. But to be honest, I spend more time scratching my brain than my balls these days. So all in all, I think, let's put up the prop. Let's see where it goes. Let's maybe try to understand that attacking the developers is probably the least productive thing we can do when it comes to. I mean, let the developers fight with each other. They're like religious zealots, right? They'll fight over whether or not it has to be true or false for months if you let them. But that's all part of the way that they work, right? But don't attack these people. Leave them be. Try to do as much as you can to incentivize them to stay. And then maybe, in a year or two, if we grow into a mature ecosystem where we have some sort of recurring tax revenue that allows us to keep different teams like the L1 team and Terra Rebels and TCV and whatever running, then maybe these guys will come back on their own, because maybe they then, break up with the next boyfriend they had, and they think about this guy whom they liked, but he was kind of an asshole, but now he's in a different place in his life where he's no longer stressed and he's no longer calling people all sorts of names. So maybe give him another chance because, you're single again or whatever, right? I think that's probably a more realistic scenario for getting some of this lost talent back.
Yeah, I think no Discord this time, and it's just giving people a runway to it all becomes this point where none of it's productive. It's all just procrastination, and it just all got too big. And what we need is, like you're explaining, is this really sole core team that knows they've got the funding they need. They've got this route that they're set on. They understand what the community want, and they move forward. I'm really excited to see, this proposal goes up, that goes up, and I think it's more than just hope for the community. It's you're here, you're making a difference, and after everything, you're still willing to push on, keep moving, and keep doing the right thing. And it just shows you stepping down from TR when you did, because of the situation in hand, shows how mature you are, and not then going on, because we have seen certain people leave, then, get angry, attack the chain and stuff like that. Not naming anyone, but, it's just not the kind of thing you want to. I mean, you don't lick a battery twice out of the smoke alarm, right? And expect it not to shock you the second time. It's just,
Yeah,
really.
no, I think you're right. I mean, I think in general, it's like, we all have to do what we feel is best for ourselves. And I think inherently just what happens once in a while when you have decentralized communities like this is that what is good for one person is not good for another person. And that creates, all this, drama.
So on the note of Rebel Station, what is left of, what is Terra Rebels, and what is Rebel Station? Is this really something that is going to be part of the future, or are you guys going to be more looking towards Interchain, the station? What really is the direction now? Because I think there's so many people that are confused.
As I talked with Strat about a few times over the past week or so, there's a slight yet subtle difference between layer 1 and layer 2, right? And I think largely, if you look at Rebel Station, that's just a DApp, right? It's just a website that connects to LCD and does stuff, right? So it's a layer 2 application. And that's great. We should have lots of those. So I think some people will like Rebel Station. If Rebel Station is a superior product compared to Terra Station, then it will win on its own, right? I think the problem is that as far as I know, and I know because I spoke with the guy who helped build Rebel Station, he handed back his money and left. Which basically means that I guess the mods are going to try to support that themselves, but these guys don't know anything about web security, so
It's
I'm not
dangerous.
too sure that's, it's going to look pretty and it's probably going to work, but is it going to maintain the level of security that it had prior to them getting rid of their security architect and the layer 2 dude leaving? I don't know. I don't think so. But I mean, it doesn't really matter, I think. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, looking ahead, our focus is going to be what I've always said, layer 1. It's the platform itself,
Yeah.
right? And I'm going to, at some point when I have time to it between Christmas and New Year's, I'll take, half a day out of my life once again to author an article around something called platform engineering, which I've been actually working with for the last 3 or 4 years. Because from my point of view, our blockchain, because it's an application specific blockchain and not a general purpose virtual machine like Ethereum, actually has to be treated as a platform. And we need to start thinking around it as a platform. That means we need to start looking at saying, okay, we have a base set of features. These features are great, but when we look at the layer 2 stuff and when we talk with people like Strathcole and some of the other layer 2 developers, we see a recurring pattern in how they use the platform. And then maybe we can identify these patterns and re-implement them inside the platform itself to make their productivity increase and make things easier for everybody else, right? Like one example of that is like the partition pool idea that I'm dealing with, and the idea of letting people create more of these commodity tokens kind of makes sense, because if you think about what people do with CV20 tokens, it's kind of the same thing, right? You implement a smart contract that's some sort of, a minter contract that belongs to a given wallet, and then some other wallets can call it and get some money. Fine. But why don't we make it a module so it's owned by the chain rather than some person? Why don't we make it a general purpose solution that can be tethered in some sort of setup where you have owners that can receive revenue from it, but maybe they can't control it directly. Different kind of constructs in that might create more mature, sustainable platform features that can do exactly the same thing that these smart contract implementations do, because they have to talk with the layer 1 anyways. They just do it through LCD, which makes the layer 2 easier to reason about, because you have the entire blockchain abstracted in a single REST API, right? So you're really just calling into different methods. But when you're working inside the layer 1, it's more like small microservices calling one another and sending events and reacting to these events. So there's a different flow of control going on in terms of how things happen, where layer 2 is very request response oriented. Layer 1 is more eventual consistency oriented, I guess you could say.
Wow.
So yeah, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna work on layer 1 because that's what's fun. Hey, that rhymes. I just made up a cool rhyme
We
as
should
well.
make t-shirts. We should make t-shirts.
I don't know. I think we tried making a hoodie, but I don't think it
Stop
was a great success.
Oh my good golly gosh and goodness. I mean, honestly, with the amount of time that was spent, I can honestly say we've spent our time very well here at HCC, and I'm very blessed to have our developer that we do have in-house. He does so much across the board in the community for so many different projects. They just wouldn't believe it. It's the same for you guys. So, what is left of Terra Rebels? I think it's one L1 developer, right? Which would be Radar. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Radar's more of a layer 2 deal. But,
yeah, so it's a misconception, because a lot of people think that there's an L1 dev left, but I don't think there is there?
Radar is good with smart contracts and stuff like that, but again, that's not layer 1, that's layer 2. And I mean, he's just one developer, and he's also a manager, and he manages as much as he develops, right? So I think at the end of the day, they would have a very hard time managing layer 1 development. Maybe they would be able to secure other people to help them with it. That would be great for them, I think. But it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, I've moved somewhere else to do my layer 1 stuff, so I can work with it, because that was what was required to do that. And as I've said before, if we can have more layer 1 teams, that's also great, right? And I don't have any I don't have any bad blood with Radar myself, right? I just don't agree with the proposal he made, and I don't agree with how it was executed on. But that's a difference of opinion, right? That doesn't mean that I can't work with him if he shows up with a layer 1 team and says, hey, we want to be part of that party as well, and we have this idea to this great module. I'll be the first one to say, hey, great, let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception, and this whole idea of just because how things have turned out that, you know, people hate each other on that assumption, or there's been huge arguments and stuff like that.
I would have to say that I'm fairly disappointed at Mudhorn on many different levels. And I can safely say that my initial assumption that I didn't want to be in a company with Echelon are correct, and I'm happy that I didn't end up in a company with Echelon, but I have no problem with anybody else.
Well, there you go. As honest as it can always be. You know, it's been stressful, and I can imagine it's been 100 times more stressful for you. But the community, I hope they get some solace from this podcast and understand that, you know, this is all going to be ended up going in the right direction. It's just what seems like a very small hitch, but a lot of the community right now, Tobias, there's just zero trust in Terra Rebels as a whole. So I don't know what their future is going to be, but I just want the community to know, regardless, we are going to be moving in the right direction. And there's so many of us. What we need is more high quality validators. Currently, our validator set is it's not good, and the ones that are high quality are so.
To be honest, I think we just need to grow up and become more professional. We shouldn't even, I think to some extent, even the witch hunt that is taking place against Terra Rebels on Twitter right now is too much.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, come on. We made a business agreement with a company. The company delivered within the terms of the agreement they put forth. They just maybe charged a small premium based on perceived goodwill. I don't know. And then they invested the money in a way that I, as a shareholder, did not agree with, so I sold my shares. Right? That's basically what happened. Going around and haunting these people. I mean, again, the mods shouldn't have been paid as much and as many, but they all deserve something for their time. So maybe again, let's take the learning that we got from this, which for me really is that we are piss ass broke, right? Talking about ideas that requires millions of dollars of investment currently is just retarded. The best we can do is spend, what we have as best as we have, and try to generate more tax revenue so we can generate more taxes and more income that we can then invest again. That is the only option available to us. Because if we were as rich as our market cap wants to indicate, then we would have had no problem paying just a $2 million fixed service contract with Terra Rebels, and then we could have handled everything and nobody would have had to worry, right? So that is the kind of the I think the main learning that I'm taking from this is that my initial assumption that we don't have any money is fairly correct. And then I think another assumption that I have derived from looking at it over time is that I also think that the user numbers that are being reported are probably also highly bloated, right? There's probably not millions of users in this network and at the end of the day, but it's more like maybe 500,000 or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of smart contracts that are like set still with, there's still coffers in their treasuries. So these smart contracts are still deploying, even though there's nobody actually at the helm, and they'll
Yeah.
keep deploying until their coffers run out. So yeah, very,
But that's
very
also
strange.
why I actually largely just want to nuke all of the smart contracts on chain with the next upgrade, and just have everybody who remains redeploy their shit. I know that's gonna be a pain in the ass for some people, but that might be the right thing to do right now. But it depends on how we can work around this Genesis problem, right? If we can't get around it, that might be the only remaining option, but it's the option that we are currently trying very hard to avoid.
So, are you aware of Jared from TFL on Twitter and then on other platforms? But he's mostly on there where I've seen him speaking about it. Is this whole they'll just hand the keys, that everything for whoever's going to assume control, so to speak, or not control. I don't know how to put it in a better word where it doesn't sound too intrusive, but they're willing to hand over Terra Station as it stands, the legacy, to you guys. But I think it was just sort of brushed off. Is that something that could be an option in the future? I mean, would that save you
I am
time
not.
or?
I'm not inherently interested in Terra Station at all as a layer 1 developer, because again, Terra Station is just a layer 2
L2, of
application.
course.
With that said, I think the first thing I heard when I heard about this thing a few weeks ago, or whenever it was, maybe a month, was that they were looking to sunset it, and that we had to create Rebel Station in order to replace it. And then I guess somewhere along the line they decided to do legacy support, and I don't know where all of that's going to end up, to be honest. And by and large, I think that somebody will have to figure out a way to step in and take over if it gets orphaned. But I don't think that's the case, because I think TCV has already indicated a willingness to keep it running, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they'll keep the servers endpoints.
And if you have Terra Rebels running Rebel Station in parallel, then that's probably just a good redundancy setup to have.
Station in itself, sorry, I'm scoffing I think they're called Joe Nuts. You know, the Jaffa cake? Yeah, Joe Nuts. Anyway, back to the thing, Jay. Stop talking about food. So Station in itself will support Lunar Classic as well. And then, yeah, they'll be keeping a legacy form of it. And Terra C Vita are going to be doing those endpoints. But Strafe Cole's been speaking about a way for us to actually do this in a decentralized manner where the system just does it. But I think it's more an idea in progress that we've more or less been like batting across the ball a quarter at each other. So I think there's a lot of options, isn't there, for you guys and for what's coming in the future, really. But this is a good sign. I think the community really panicked when they saw that, you left Terra Rebels, but I was very adamant in my video that you specified you're leaving Terra Rebels, not leaving the Lunar Classic community. So I think a lot of people are very happy.
I still have, a bag of something roughly, I think, 70 million Lunc, of which I gave 50 million Lunc to my son. So I mean, I have all the reasons in the world to stay invested in this community. I just need to balance the amount of time, because quite frankly, I've had 2 full-time jobs for the last 6 months, and I'm too old for that shit.
I hear that. I myself, with the amount we've invested into this and everything just always been in the group, we're not doing this for money. We're always doing this for non-profit. I mean, our auto compounding module is awesome because you just don't need an extra wallet. You don't need to do anything intricate. You literally just enable it, approve it, and it's done. And then we've provided it to free to other validators. And there are good people out there, aside obviously what you guys are doing as well. There's so many awesome people that have like Meta Gloria. They're working so hard lunar burning nights and
But I think, I think it's just important to get to this place where we can step up the ladder to the next level and sort of become more than just this meme coin thing we are right now. Because even guys like you at the HTC factory, you and Strat and some of the other guys, you're doing, fabulous work. And as you said, you're a non-profit, but at some point you guys also need to be incentivized further than that, right? Because again, if you guys end up being a really excellent team that works very well together, then other investor groups are going to start looking to you guys and see if they can incentivize you. Let's take it down to the soccer club analogy, right? If you have the world's best offensive midfield player, and he's called Messi, then you make damn sure that Messi is fucking happy. Otherwise, he's going to go somewhere else. And if he goes somewhere else, your entire football club is going to collapse for a couple of years, like what happened, with Barcelona, which is one of my favorite teams.
yeah.
So the bottom line is that you need to understand this, and then, especially if they're working for peanuts, then don't make them feel bad about that, right? And that doesn't matter who they are, right? If people are trying to build value in this community, you should really treat them like unicorns and, make sure that they're protected and cared for, because the unicorns are the ones that are going to lead us out of this particular forest that we're currently stuck in.
100%.
And we
100%.
have to identify and sustain those, and that will have to happen on behalf of a lot of other people who will, do good stuff, but who are really just the people, carrying the water to the field so the players can get something to drink. And I guarantee you that the people who do that, who carry the water, if they get paid, which they don't, they get paid very little and probably just in merchandise and stuff like that. Because typically people who do these things in football clubs are simply just drafted from the junior ranks. And regardless of how you look at it, most of our moderators are kids, right? So they were drafted from the junior ranks, and they should have understood that and maybe taken a bit more or a bit less for themselves and given a bit more, even though it was unfair to the developers in general, right? That's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So for the people listening, we do use the other 50% of what we don't burn to actually pretty much keep our team as happy as we can, and then we give each other awesome back rubs to keep each other in check too. But we are trying to now, more look towards things as, if we're to continue being part of the community, then we do need to treat things in a different manner, like you're saying. So I actually appreciate you saying that, because it's a lot easier for people to understand it when it comes from someone like you. So we've always like, I work a full-time job, even when I broke my back, like I'm still, mending all of it now, but still just doing everything. It's, we're all working so hard. And if people just give us the time, give us the resources, this can just be so much bigger. So, your partitioning pools in themselves, they're a massive game changer, because the stable quan kind of thing, it kind of blew up before, if I'm right. It really did start to go somewhere before the crash.
I think there is definitely a world for a sound money system based on crypto, yes. I'm not going to be using the reference stablecoin or repeg or anything like that until the US Senate is done figuring out who they're going to line up against the wall and shoot. And I really don't want to be part of that group, right? So, yeah, that's just my view on it.
Yeah, so that was one of the things I was going to ask you about is, there's so many people who are like, when repeg this, when that, but there's so many implications still, isn't there, too?
They're all literally just asking, when can I collect profit on my trade investment?
Exactly. So what
and
we
I'm
know,
like, I'm literally like, I don't give a fuck, because it doesn't matter. you can collect profit on your investment the second the value of the network sustains that profit, and not a second before that. And there's no person that single-handedly can tell you when that is, because that's the whole nature of a decentralized network. We don't really know what's going on all over the place all of the time.
The funniest thing about, I don't know if you've read the audit, but the funniest thing, as you saying about, people waiting to take profit, is JWAMB was literally pumping money back into the system for those people to literally to cash out. In the audit, reading it, it's like literally they're pumping money in and it's just getting drained out straight away. And then they did it again and it happened again. And there's so many people there and here that are specifically just money grabbers. They want to see certain things happen, and people want to see like X amount of coins burned, regardless of the result that we end up with.
Yeah, but that's actually why I really like this CoinDesk article I linked the other day on Twitter, because the guy who was writing the article, he was actually making an excellent point about the sort of limits of digital capitalism, I guess you could say, and how things need to change, right? It's the narrative that I've actually been trying to preach all along of, openness, inclusiveness, and all of that. But I mean, we're all human beings. I've also made transgressions against that ideal. But I think it's an ideal that we still need to try to, work towards. And as I said a few months back, I think, there's no doubt that this initial pump we got was a speculative pump. It was, looking at how it happened, it was driven by no more than maybe a few actors, because there were situations when during the pump where KuCoin literally ran out of Lunc.
Yes.
They had no more Lunc to sell. So somebody had probably very carefully been building up a perpetual position, probably backed by, you would need roughly $10 million to create $1 billion worth of value in a setup like that. And then they just hit the whenever they got to that point where they felt comfortable in their control of the market, they just, hit the pump because they saw a revival story happening. And then people obviously started buying into that, and then they just had to sit around and look at the trades going into the different sexes and dexes, and then inherently just start, dumping small chunks whenever the liquidity going into the network was great enough to sustain that, so they could take profit. And I think what we're seeing now is sort of the end of that cycle, and now we will probably see a lot of the people who were very fuddish for the last couple of months become very FOMO-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll probably see a similar situation occur again, just maybe with some new whales driving the price this time. And then that will go somewhere, and then it'll consolidate, and we'll probably do that for a decade or two. Unless you would somehow magically spawn the next World of Warcraft or some stupid shit like that, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? So Exodus is highly, highly underrated, and you'll appreciate Unreal Engine 5, more than most people. They've really got you'll understand this. World of Warcraft started as this tiny. I used to play World of Warcraft at the same time I was playing RuneScape, and it was tiny. It started off so small. No metaverse is managing to really set themselves aside. Sandboxes, it's all blocky. Yeah, it's good. Yes, all the different things you can do. But if you want a piece of land, it's like $5,000 for a crappy piece of land. And with Exodus being built, it's a game changer. I mean, I've interweaved Lunatic's token with Exodus, and Lunar Burning Nights, they're talking to Exodus now, and Metaglory, they're all talking and they're all actually working together. We have a really good GameFi sector going on, and that could really help the coin in the future, because I worked with Exodus hands down to secure LUNC as a 100% use case, and it is like favored over everything else in their metaverse. So, if something that could blow up.
I think when it comes to games, I've been playing computer games since I was a small kid, right? and it's difficult to predict what the next big game's gonna be. I think there's a lot of games coming out these days because there's so much focus on like game services like Xbox Game Pass or Steam or some of these the Epic thing and some of these other providers. So I think the idea is to try to focus on the fungibility aspect of using crypto in games in a sense where you could say that, let's say you find a sort of power, right, in some game. Uh, would there be a way to express this using like an interchain gaming standard? So that sort of power as an NFT could be transferred to another game, right?
Boom.
That I think is the interesting use case here. I think if we can get that working, that I think will create a unique experience in games that have not been seen before, which would probably increase the likelihood that some of these games would then blow up in the public and so on, because all of that sort of then starts playing into the play to earn analogy, but it makes play to earn transcend across many different games. I guess often play to earn right now is about keeping people within your specific universe or like Minecraft or whatever. But if people could move certain things along, then, I always wanted to create a computer game that I called Soul, which was about the idea of being able to bring stuff with you into sort of if you died, and then you wouldn't revive as the same person, but you would be allowed to transfer a certain amount of something onto the next character you played, right? So something like that, I think, would be very interesting from the whole GameFi thing, and really would probably make that blow up in a crypto context because that would be unique and I think fairly new.
Yeah, so I help Exodus with marketing tactics and really how can they, you know, expand their what they call their universe. But I've always seen it as Ready Player One kind of system where you actually see all of these other games in the GameFi sector within what you're building, and you actually create portals to those games
Yeah, yeah.
from Exodus. So
But
that
for that to happen, you need a standard, right? You need something that allows people to interoperate across some sort of software protocol that sits on top of a
interchain
transport protocol, right?
feather protocol.
Yeah. So within the ICS, I guess you need to derive a specific standard for games, right? Because you can make, I guess, new standards within the interchain standard thingy. So that's more the point I'm talking about. What is the definition of an object when you look at it from a JSON perspective? What's the schema you're dealing with when you're exchanging data? It's things like these that are important.
They honestly, I'm so excited for Interchain. I don't know if you can tell. I keep talking about it quite a lot recently, but this whole idea of just being able to, like, I'm looking right now at a screenshot that Jared's put out today, actually, of what the station looks like on the where all the staking is, and you'll have it so it's tabs like Terra, Osmosis, Juno, Atom, and then you can just it makes everything so easy, and this interoperability is something that we need. So Ed wrote an article recently
Yeah, but
about
the interchain station is still just a layer 2 thing, right?
yes,
It's just important because this is where things sometimes, I mean, inherently from an implementation perspective, to do something like that, it's not really that difficult because all of these different chains, they all use the same sort of standardized protocol, right?
yeah, being the
Yes.
Cosmos.
Yes. So this is what makes it work. But if you wanted something like this to work between games running on different smart contracts on different blockchains, meaning that they would interoperate with one another without, let's say, human intervention, uh, then you would need a more extended subset of that to allow to express how that would work, right? That's inherently what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. So I actually have the map of the Cosmos up just as we was talking because
Yeah.
it's so it's So a lot of people, there's this misconception, like people say to me all the time, oh, all validators should burn 10% of their stake, their delegation rewards. And it's like, these coins are coming from the system. Like, we, with something like Instachain, either it being an L2 application, gives the ability for people that are not so there and with it to just openly interoperate with all of these different things, and we can gain liquidity and bring it to our own chain if you decide to build and more or less merge that technology. So a project that I'm working on will pretty much lead us to delegating coins across multiple, in the cosmos in itself. So with Juno, Injective, Osmosis, and Luna in itself is also another place. I mean, for God's sakes, we can interoperate with Kronos right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, we can. I think the main problem we have right now within the realm of interoperability is what we call discoverability. So right now, to connect two chains, you typically have to deploy an IBC client on each side, right? And then you'll be able to do like IBC communication. But wouldn't it be great if Cosmos was just automatically capable of discovering and deploying these clients for us, so we wouldn't have to worry about that?
Well, that's
That
always the next step, isn't it? It's automating it, making it do it itself.
Yes, exactly. Because that would really make it interesting, right? Then all the networks would have the ability to know about each other by default, which means that you wouldn't have to really keep track of the universe anymore the way that we do. Because the thing is that at some point, the Cosmos universe is going to grow so large that it's going to be hard to keep track of all of these different clients manually. And that's going to cause, various issues where clients are going to drift out of sync, and then you're going to discover it, and then you're going to update it or whatever. But if that could all be automated, that would really change the way that Cosmos scalability works in general.
It's definitely the next step, because that it's the way that the Tendermint worked was to pretty much automate a lot of stuff and then cluster that down to make it a lot more easier, and you not have to build that and Feather protocol. So hopefully it is leading up to that. I mean, the way, you're one of these people that I've always believed is part of a very big, you're a solution to a very big problem. And if we can just get the right minds behind this, and I mean, it's always going to be an issue where you guys just want to code. So I honestly believe you having a crack team, but also a very small team and not growing too fast it's going to be key to your future. So Tobias, what's going on with V23 just before we finish up here for this podcast? But what's going on with V23? Has that been delivered? Is it going to be delivered? Is that been paid for?
Well, I mean, V23, depending on how you look at it, is basically just opening the IBC again, right?
Are you eating a donut?
What? No, I'm finishing my cold dinner while we talk. No, so I think we need to stop talking about the current versioning scheme and start talking about the new semantic versioning scheme that we want to adopt, right? So currently, we just deployed 104, which is the IBC component of what you know as V23. And now we're in the process of trying to make the 203 client work, which is the new client that contains the upgraded Cosmos SDK, which would leave us at 45.11, and a slightly patched Tendermint version. And then we're probably going to stick with Cosmos VASM 0.16 up until the V204 release, because that will probably make it easier for us to, how can you say, take smaller steps, which is something I know that Ed and Jacob are very keen on, so I don't really have a problem with that.
I like small steps. We work on small steps. It's very important to think about everything before you move forward. I mean, the communication skills of well, not your, because you're not part of it anymore, but the communication skills recently of the marketing is just, I'm really looking forward to this refreshment of really dead set minds that the community trust. This is such an important thing right now, is trust, creditability. I'm so, why can't I say that word? It's so important.
Credibility.
Yeah, it's so important because, there's been so many people that have, proven time and time and time again that they're just not the real people that should be either at the forefront or doing the things that they should be doing. It's all just,
I think in general we should be very careful about trying to pin our hopes on a few people, even if those people are Ed and myself, right? That is not ever a good strategy to have. I think with the current setup that we have, I personally believe that the proposal that Ed has been working on, which I've been working on with him for the layer one team, focuses on what I personally think are the most qualified candidates at our disposal. And then I think that is, where we're gonna have to start from. But we should be constantly looking to attract other talent, especially blockchain development talent, because those are fairly rare, and incentivize them to come in and work, right? Which is also why Ed and I are talking about, how will we grow the layer one team over time? What is the approximate size, right? So I think we're going to start with 3 people just to keep it simple. And then we're going to have a few auxiliary juniors to support, but they're not really part of the, core team. They're more like satellites. But I think if we can make that core team of 3 people work, and we can deliver on some of the milestones that we agree on with the community, then we will probably try to grow that team up until around, I think 8 people would be optimal, right? I think I heard somebody reference like 6 people were working on the core team and some other similar situation. I think in general, if you can have a team of 2 pizza-sized people, then that's a good place to be. And if they can focus extensively on our layer one thing, then I think we will be able to start building more new features. Because one of the really good things about being able to upgrade when we get past the challenges we're currently fighting with is that we will be able to use more of the existing tool chain around building Cosmos chains, and more in particular something called Ignite CLI. So I think our short-term focus will be in the first 3 months to sort of make a plan, solve some problems, prove our work. And after that, that will then focus into 2 tracks where we will then need to bring in some more devs if we have the capacity and the money for it. Where we will, in one track, be able to focus on education, because I really think that in general the Cosmos ecosystem suffers from a lack of high quality, self-study material. I mean, there are a lot of stuff out there, but there could definitely be more.
agreed.
And
Yeah,
I think in particular in and around our network, we could definitely do some cool dojo stuff with some code creators and stuff that regular developers could just pick off the shelf and run through, while also then working on new modules and seeing how we would then at some point be at V45 plus on Cosmos SDK. We can then start using these tools that we have also, which will then allow us to make others more productive. And then we can really start, saying, okay, now we have the capacity not only to support and maintain, but also to build new modules, which is akin to building new features in our platform.
yeah, agreed on that high quality thing. It's across the board. We have such a lack of, developers, and there's been a lot of them that have been also scared away, and we've lost people along the way. But this all seems to be going on the right track. And, regardless of what people believing or what they see as their hope and what they're solely relying on, I think people, if they want to be involved with a movement which is currently building and in a very fragile state, and at any point someone could pull 5 matchsticks out and the whole thing comes tumbling down, right? But you could be part of something which is very small right now and could become very big in the future. And if we get the right minds behind this, we move correctly, we can do the right things. And I'm super excited. And, it's Christmas. It's the Christmas period. I know a lot of people don't celebrate Christmas. A lot of people do, but do understand that, a lot of people have got families and don't expect this proposal to possibly be coming out in the next few days. Allow some time, sit on your hands a little bit and understand the situation in hand is not, it's not the end. It's just a hurdle we need to get over.
Well, I mean, as long as there's activity in the network, there will always be someone looking to, build on that. So yeah, I think, we've gotten a lot of attention. As long as we can find a way to keep validators and devs, running, we'll be okay. But that is probably the existential problem that we will be dealing with for the next foreseeable future.
Yeah, no, agreed. Well, we're definitely still building. We are launching our play to earn Penguin Island in Exodus next year. We've got the Hatchery, which is coming soon, which is the next extension on our NFT project, which is paying out the highest stake in rewards currently for NFTs in the Terra Classic space, which is awesome. There are people building. So yeah, it's really awesome. Zaradar, Tobias, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time. I hope this gets everything sort of settled for people and understand there's no hard feelings on either side. People don't hate each other. People aren't at each other's throats. We're all just getting on with it and moving forward and not really getting involved in this chaos.
Yep.
Folks, stay safe. None of this is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Neither is Tobias. Neither is my cat. And we'll catch you in the next one.